Thank you, Linda. Good evening and welcome everyone to this panel discussion about place and creating about place. I am Kate Liston-Mills. I'm a writer from Pambula. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered, the Jiringanj people of the Yuin Nation. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, and on which Dear Ibis was written on, the Dawa people of the Yuin Nation. I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. I want to especially thank all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are here tonight, and especially Cheryl, who's here on the panel, and I can't believe it. I also want to thank my First Nations friends who know who they are, who help me all the time to be better and teach me and help me connect to country in a deeper way. I am learning. Dear Ibis was not a book that I hoped one day would get published. It's more of a journey of rehabilitation and healing. This book is the sequel to my first book, The Waterfowl Are Drunk, and I'm going to use someone else's words to describe it because it's easier. So my copy editor described it as, there's a quote, "A pointed and poignant collection of short stories for the present moment. Dear Ibis is a tender yet unflinching meditation on what it means to feel at home and what it means to have this taken away. Set in New South Wales's lush south coast against the backdrop of the 2019-2020 bushfires come stories of birth and death, disability and resilience, colonial greed and moral reckonings. Infused with lyrical prose, vast coastal backdrop and a vividly realised cast of characters, Dear Ibis is a letter for anyone feeling unmoored, trying to find their way back to shore." Place plays such an important role in my book, in examining trauma, grief and memory, in connecting the animal and human world, and in exploring who is the human in its environment and who is the human without its environment. The seeds for tonight's discussion were planted during a conversation I had with Meg Jordan-Jones at the Bega Library. The conversation kind of grew from there, and here we are. I did drive Meg a bit crazy, I think, because it started as an author talk, but I don't really feel like an author with a book. I feel more like a flawed human being wanting to be better and starting a journey of self-discovery and connection with the world around me. And I don't do that alone. I do that with people. So these women on this panel here are some of my most revered idols. So it felt so right that they have this discussion with me. They accepted, and I can't believe it. And I think it's really important that we continue to have conversations about the place in which we live. We continue to tell stories and share them, and to live creatively in this beautiful place we're lucky to call home. So thank you very much.
I reckon you can probably all hear me without the mic, but I'm going to switch us over to the mic so that for the rest of the conversation you can hear everyone's voices. My name is Raechelle Kennedy, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here in such fine company tonight. When I asked the others on the panel how they'd like me to introduce them, they gave me a blank page and a lot of trust. So I decided, rather than read out loud a bio that you could find on the internet or in the cover of a book, that I would just introduce them as my friends, because they are. And that is part of what makes this evening so special to me. So if you're okay with that, I'd like to introduce you to Robyn Martin, Canterlough-based and South Australian-born. Robyn is a songwriter, a musician, a teacher, and a huge-hearted advocate for what is good and just in this world. Beside Robyn is Cheryl Davison, a proud Yuin woman based in Tilba, a painter, a storyteller, a community leader, and an inspiring visionary in the vital work of culture and language reclamation. Alexandra Seddon is a poet, an artist, and a passionate conservationist. She has spent decades of her life here on country, fostering restorative healing spaces like Cow's Nest Community Farm, Potteroo Palace, and Panbula Wetlands, safe homes for both human and non-human creatures alike. And Kate Liston-Mills is proudly from Panbula. She's a writer, educator, librarian, as well as a mother of 2 small children. In this short season of finally getting to meet and getting to know Kate, I've already learned her to be a woman who fights for what she believes in, speaks the truth as she sees it, and moves with a sort of deep generosity that makes a stranger quickly feel like a friend.
Thank you.
And I'm Ray, a bit of a migratory bird that started life by a riverbank in Canada, in small town Canada, and now finds myself making home in even smaller town Candelo. I love stories and I love community, and they are at the root of most of my best ideas and my worst heartbreaks. I write and create because it's how I make sense of myself and the world, and it's all I really know to do. Thank you for being here with us. We've never done this before. We've never shared this space together like this before. Some of us have never sat on a panel like this before. We just all said yes. So there's a lot of courage up here and a lot of gratitude that you showed up. So thank you. We've got a bit of time together and we've got a handful of questions. Our thought was to let this unfold as organically as we could. We've brought some things to share, some examples of how place finds its way into our work. And we're just going to see what happens. And if we time it right, there'll be a little bit of room at the end for some questions. But we'll see how chatty we get up here. So tonight we're hoping to explore some things, like what do we mean when we talk about place? What are the landscapes, external, internal, that we circle back on again and again? What sort of questions do we pace and retrace? What stories keep pulling us in? Why does it matter at all? And how do we get there, and does the exploring ever end? Sound good? Okay, we're gonna begin. Robs, will you grab the mic? And we're gonna begin with Cheryl. Cheryl, I'll just let you take the floor with the question. What do you mean when you talk about place?
Place means so many different things to me. I've been thinking about this all week because, you know, how long is a piece of string, really? What is place to me? I can start by saying this place, Bega, is the place where I was born. What's special about Bega is it's where my grandfather is buried. It's where all my relatives all live. It's a place I remember visiting when I was only young, when our people lived in little tin humpies on the northern banks of the river. And, you know, I've asked the girls, I didn't want to do Welcome Tonight because I don't feel that I am an elder yet, that, you know, that is something that I'm still growing into, and I'm not privileged to that just yet. And we have elders here in Bega already. What I've been thinking about with this, with place is I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about tonight, but about a week and a half ago, we invited Melanie Horsnell to come to home help us write a song, me and my sisters, in language. And for me, I wanted to write about culture. And so the discussion started off with our culture, and it started off with, we've lost our culture. Our culture's been stolen. It's been taken away, you know. And it was that moment there that I thought about it, and, you know, I had to change the narrative a bit about that, because I don't feel that our culture can be stolen. I don't feel that our culture can be taken away, that it's always there. And if I was talking through this with my sisters and Melanie about, you know, sitting in a place where my grandmothers sat, and they didn't just leave our culture behind. They had to get up and really run for their lives, to save themselves and save their children as much as they could. And they left things there for us today in that place to come back and finish off the work that they'd started. And so all week I've been writing about that, and I want to share it with you. And I'm not a poet, and I am writing in language, which I do love, because it's about coming back to that place, sitting where my foremothers sat, and creating that, our culture, finishing off that creation. Can I get you to hold that, please, Ron? I come from a place of my foremothers, a quiet place. My grandmothers entered this place with soft-spoken language and concentration, looking and listening for every sound and movement. A place where the basket grass grows, where the oysters, bimblers and fish are in abundance. A sheltered place, a place to light a fire and get warm and cook what we gather from the shores. We know this place. My grandmother knew this place, as did her grandmothers. This is a place we sit and talk and create physical and emotional functionality. With the look and the point with the lips, we bring awareness to others. Our ancestors have come to gather around us. Eons of generations come to this place. The time is measured by the stories told of when once the shores where we sit did not exist. They were further to the east, beyond where Barranguba set up his camp before the rising oceans. My foremothers sit quietly, making things they come to this place for. A basket, some fishing twine, fishing hooks. If they find the right vine, they'll make cockle baskets to take oysters and bimblers back to camp and share with others. The chatter amongst each other, making the baskets and thinking about their journey to another place where the people from everywhere gather for ceremony, a joyous time, a place to gather moth, a time when they leave the shores of the lakes and head into the mountains. So that is the start. But what happens next is 150 years of invasion and trauma and running and trying to survive. And so for me, it's important to go back to that place where my foremothers sat. We sit down and we light a fire with our friends and we bring them in. Come and sit down. Light that fire, cook up some fish, let's have a yarn. Because now what I'm doing is, I'm doing that now. I'm teaching, I'm trying to learn the language myself, but I'm doing it for everyone else. I know how to make traditional baskets, I was taught that. But I'm going back to that place where my grandmother sat making those baskets. Because in that, those baskets, that making of those baskets, it's coming back to our culture and the finishing off of those works that our ancestors started is really important to me. And so we sat there for a while with Mel and we talked about this idea last fortnight and we wrote a little song about it. I don't know whether I should sing it.
Yes.
I hope that all makes sense, what I'm talking about. But I'll give it a crack, okay?
That's all any of us are doing, Cheryl.
Yeah. I did ask my daughter to come down Tamsin to help me because I'm going to be a little bit nervous, but I'll get through this. But I tell you now, the work, when we come together, my sisters and I and my friends, my newfound friends, Robyn and Ray and the Mudgeon girls, David and all the Candelo creatives, we find healing in what we're doing now because we do come into things with trauma. But this is about come and sit down and talk and eat with us. Okay. Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you. Yana Jamaru Nyaringa Wangan Damulada Yahweh Duduga Dambamu Jinama Yana Jinga Mana Yabujaga Dula Yahweh Bangari Darani Nyanka Yana Jamaru Nyarangal Wangan Damulada Yahweh Duduga Dambamu Jinama. That's all. So that word translated is come gather, women, young women, old women, come here, come touch, come see, to make, to complete, come sit, come create. Come here. Big hills, spotted gum, sit down. Yeah.
Yeah, Robyn, do you want to?
Okay. Thanks, Cheryl. Wow. So, the question about what it means to be in place, or what does place mean?
Yeah.
I feel like I don't really know. But what I've noticed in my writing is as soon as I go to make something place specific in my writing or in a song, there's no escaping bringing me into it. And so I think usually I immediately feel uncomfortable because it requires it requires me, and there's an authenticity there. And reading Kate's book, it's like a bit of magic somehow. As soon as I'm reading about place, it's like I'm right there in the story somehow immediately, and can kind of connect with the voice in the story. Yeah.
Alexandra, do you want to?
Yeah. At first, when I saw Ray's question, I felt really lost. And then I thought, even though I've only been here since 1975, I'm very old. Okay, I still feel that this valley, I'm part of. I'm not Indigenous, but I can feel part, and I suppose I tried to write about that in The Mountain, which was a long time ago, 1988, and I'll just read a little bit of it because it's all one long poem, but it takes about 10 minutes or 12 minutes, so I'll just read some little bits which maybe give the idea. I'm the mountain. I do not move. I'm here always. I feel, but I do not act. Others are the actors. Rain falls through my ribs, a speckled pocking of drops on silk skin. Ripples and ripples of hills and valleys where fish fly. Frost can cling tight to leaf extremities, encrustations. Frost can bite, can sing. Ice has a way with rocks too. I'm the mountain. I remain still, the backdrop for all this glitter and magic. Some of my slopes are very steep, and the trunks of the gums grow very long and straight and white. Antechinus is at home here. I love it.
I love them.
The forest blocks the view and whispers to humans of dragons and death. This is the Neath world. They chip at its edges. Knives slice through the forest, making scars. Humans prefer shrubbery. I'm the mountain. They mostly leave me alone to stare at the sky. In autumn, there are burnings, bombs of fire dropped from helicopters, those large mosquitoes which pester the middle air. My skin is sore. Many huge trees crash, others turn black. The underbrush sizzles, a confusion of wallabies, wombats, quolls, beetles and ants without direction, muffled by the smoke. And surrendering easily, they die quietly. I have become very cold over millions of years, just as flesh bodies become cold before they become part of the earth again. They cool slowly until their substance is similar and mixes with grasses and dung and stones and dust, sawdust. There is sawdust on some of my slopes. The trees are mixing themselves back into the soil. They crumble slowly in tangles of broken branch and Bosseria spinosa. And there are mixtures of hair and bones and leaves. All these things make a coat over my slopes. Their rhythms change shape, are always moving. I lost that one here. I think it was there. Sorry. The sea has wrapped me with slight lappings. The sea is an emotional being. Every flicker of change is echoed and rippled and magnified. But all this reaches the utmost expression where the sky and the sea meet. Wrinkles on the sea's face, that is. Lower down, in the colder, darker parts, there is less movement. Stillness and silence, those beloveds are back again. And I thought about, I don't have to read anymore, I don't think. I thought about it and I thought, well, I really would like to go back into the earth. I would like to feed all those little creatures that live under the earth. I really would like to. And that's what place is to me. It's all those little worms and microbes and fungi and those things that are working, except where things like superphosphate and so on have killed them all. But mostly they're still there, just working away. And when Cheryl was talking, I started thinking of Marcus Mundy, because when I said to him, I'm hopeless, I can talk through it, I have to be able to talk through it. When I said to him, it's just horrific that all that, he was bringing 6 young men, Indigenous men, or school kids, out to Cow's Nest to work with Anna and learn from the bottom up, about an individual native animal, one at a time each week. And I said to him, this is just so horrible that you've been cut off from all that culture. And he said, it's still there. It's still there. And I thought of that when you were talking. Yeah, and that's how I feel about place. To go back into all that down. I mean, I haven't got all that culture, but I can go back into the earth. I can go back and be part of all that wonderful life that goes on under there, and that's place for me.
What is place to me? I did ask this question at the beginning of writing Dear Ibis, and it's very hard as a non-Aboriginal person to answer this question because it means a lot to me. But who am I? Who am I to ask that question? So it's very important that we don't tell stories that aren't ours. And so that was very hard too, because how do I tell truth that isn't mine to tell? So I thought, what can I do? I can tell my truth. And so that's what I did, what is place to me. And Dear Ibis, it's very much about place, but I don't think we can talk about place without talking about placelessness. And so, like some of the sensitive readers that read my book, they struggled with the fact that the topic of refugees was in there. And they're like, that's a bit that's a bit of a foreign concept. I think I wouldn't go there. And I said, I don't think I cannot go there. You can't talk about belonging and having a home and having a place without talking about not having a place, not having a home, and not belonging. So I did go there, and it was very uncomfortable, but that's okay. Dear Ibis is very much about having uncomfortable conversations with yourself and with others, and I really tried just to tell my story, and I really tried, and I know that there is one story in there that doesn't seem like my story, but and it's set south of Eden, and it's called Empire, Part 1, I think, is what it's called. That is not my truth to tell, so I definitely fictionalised it. But I would say most of you will recognise who I'm talking about in that story. I grew up south of Pambula, on Dawa land, and I went to school at Eden, preschool, primary school and high school in Eden. And I spent a lot of time in Kaya, and I now know the Aboriginal story behind why Kaya is called Kaya. I am not telling that story tonight, but it's an amazing story if you get to hear it one day. And I would go to Boyd Town a lot. And I had goosebumps every time I went there. I didn't know why. I'd just get these shivers all up my back and down my arms. I never understood why until I did a lesson with Uncle Graham Moore. And then I learnt more about the history of how that place was built and all the trauma that went on there. During the time when I was writing Dear Ibis, Scott Morrison, I really made an effort not to be political in my prep for tonight. It's very unavoidable sometimes though. Scott Morrison was like on the news in the background while I was writing and fine-tuning Empire Part 1. And I heard him say, like I just like tuned in for 1 second, he said, it was during the Black Lives Matter movement, and he said, we never had slavery here in Australia. And I learnt very early on that we did from my dad, who's here. And Ben Boyd was one of the first people to bring slavery to our shores, and that happened here, not just in Australia, actually here. So that was just diabolical that we could have this Prime Minister who wasn't even aware of the truth of how places like Boyd Town was built and how it originated. So I think place for me is everything that came before me and everything that is now and everything that will come, all in the one moment with me in this space. And that's pretty big. And I can't even begin to understand that as a non-Aboriginal person, but I can try and be honest about the now, and I can work on my own trauma so that my future decisions are better informed and that I fight for place and I protect it and I try and achieve some sort of deep connection to the place I live, because actually I will borrow Uncle Aussie's, I shouldn't do this, but it's just so spot on for what I'm trying to say. Uncle Aussie Cruz, who is a total legend, was at a book launch recently. He kind of launched it. I think it might have been John Blai's book, actually. And he said, the difference between my people, by my people I mean Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people, is our relationship to place, is our relationship to land. And he said, my people belong to the earth. My people come from the earth. The earth is our mother, and there's a balance, and we belong to land, not the other way around. Non-Aboriginal people come in and they own land. They buy land, they own it. And that slight shift in understanding kind of breaks it all down for us, how we've got to this place in time where we think we can, you know, use and abuse and do things however we want to do it because we own it. So I often go back and think about that, and yeah, I just want to try and keep learning about place. And I think we've all got a responsibility to continue learning about place from our First Nations people. And just thank Cheryl for singing in language. Because when we talk about place, like I speak English, but English wasn't born here. English is a language from elsewhere, whereas this language is of this land. And that's just something incredibly, I feel very privileged to be hearing it and enjoying it. So thank you.
I'm going to switch to this mic because this one's all caught up. For me, what place means to me is something that I'm definitely still exploring. It's so interesting to answer this last after listening to everyone, because I hear pieces of myself in all of your stories, and I don't know if I really thought a lot about place, and I don't know if I really created a lot about place before I came to Australia. Even though I was writing and creating when I was living in Canada, I think, I came as a migrant on a privileged end of a very biased immigration system. And that was a story, when I entered an immigration story, that started, I think, my reckoning with what is place and what does it mean to belong as a white, heterosexual, English-speaking Canadian, navigating the immigration system in this country, which favored someone like me. I took on a lot of guilt, which is not that healthy or productive of a feeling, but it was a real feeling for me. And that began, I think, a journey of, okay, if you are going to exercise this privilege to pick up your life and move across the world because you've fallen in love with someone, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do with that? And I think I found myself here and realized I don't know where I am. Not just like, I don't know the map of Australia. I haven't traveled this country, but I don't actually know whose country I'm on. I don't know the name of that tree. I don't know what you plant in July. I don't know which way is north. I didn't know where I was. And I think that's where my journey of leaning into place in a really intentional way began, because I felt really disoriented. I felt both at home and completely lost. I didn't know how to tell someone directions about which way to go to get anywhere. And I didn't know how to speak by name the country, the landscape, the animals, the plants. So for me, I think when I think about place and what I mean when I speak about place, I feel like a baby. I feel like I'm just beginning this story for myself of trying to understand in a way I never used to ask, where am I? What is the story of this place and where do I fit into it? But then it's also made me ask, where have I come from? Because it's made me realize all the questions I never asked for the first 30 years of my life. The country I never really learned that I was born and raised on. And so there's this sort of reckoning inside me of both at once trying to learn where I am and learn where I've come from. And for me, the coming together of those two things, it's like this deep whirlpool of questions that I think I exist in almost every time I pick up the pen. And I'm just trying to anchor myself somewhere, and I keep moving between here and there, between Yuin country and Anishinaabe country, between the northern and southern hemispheres. And sometimes I feel very confused and disoriented inside. And sometimes I feel like for the first time in my life, I'm starting to understand something. I'm starting to see my place in something. Yeah. So what is place to me? It's a very big story that has a lot to do with migration. It has some guilt in it. It has a deep curiosity in it. Yeah, and it feels one that I will probably spend the rest of my life learning. Yeah, maybe I'll share a piece and then lead us into another question, if that works. It was hard to pick a piece because I feel like I write about this all the time. But yeah, this is a piece that I wrote as part of a show that Robyn and Cheryl and I and Chinnamayilika and other musicians from Candelo created called Songs from You and Country. And I think that the invitation to create this body of work together pulled me into exploring place in a whole new way. The opportunity to stand with Cheryl and Chinnamayilika, who are singing in language and who are leaning deep into this story of their own place, made me feel like you said, Kate, the only story I have to tell is my own, and I wanted to be really honest in it, and that took me into this one of the most honest processes of writing I think I've ever been in. The poem's in 3 parts, and I'm just going to read the middle part. In the beginning, there was story. In the end, story is what we all become. Through the middle, there runs a fault line. In my chest, there is a bihemisphere heart, a sense of home that is spread across an ocean. If you could read my topography, you would see that I am built out of freshwater lakes and fallen maple leaves. Rolling hills, cedar trees, purple asters, and roadside tiger lilies. Snowmelt runs through my veins. 60 degrees south, a continental shift in geography. Frozen ponds blend into the saltwater beach, pine needles tangled up in seaweed. Bones formed on the Canadian Shield fuse with the Great Dividing Range. I am deciduous forests and eucalypt bush. I am creaking icebergs and wattles in bloom. I am red-winged blackbird and black cockatoo. In the dead of winter, I crave a strawberry moon. I am a woman being woven from 2 landscapes. I am teasing apart the tangled threads of migration and place. There is a long crack in my surface, a fault line that trembles between strength and weakness. 15,000 kilometers of space between where I start and where I end. 40 laps around the sun and still wrestling with where I am and where I am from. Disorientation is a familiar refrain. The lines on my skin are a map, not of roads, but of borders. This story is a story of being fractured. So I'm going to take that and lead us into a question about, are there questions or landscapes that inspire or provoke you? Are there things I notice in my writing that I keep coming back to waterways? That I was born by a river, that I was raised by another river, that I've moved to a town that sits on a creek by an ocean. There are landscapes for me that I keep returning to try to make sense of myself and my story, or that I find inspiration in. So I'm going to put that question out to everybody else. Are there particular questions that niggle around in there, or landscapes that you find provoke your creativity, your thoughts, or that you keep returning to? Cheryl?
For those that may have come to any of my exhibitions over the years, they may have noticed that in every show there is a painting of Gulaga. And it's really important for me to continue telling that story, because this is our place. I think it's a really important story. It's an ancient story that our community all know, and we're very lucky to have that story still being told today. And so with that, I continue to have that story in every exhibition, because I know so many different parts of that story, and I'm always learning new things, as I did just today or yesterday. Someone had told me something new about Gulaga. And, when I paint Gulaga, and people come into the show and they say, the artwork that I do, they live near Gulaga, but it helps them connect to country as well. So they know now the place where they live it's actually, they know everything that they need to know about that story. And it does help them connect and understand our culture. I just wanted to share that with everyone.
For those that maybe don't know it, talk about what Gulaga is. The significance.
Yeah, so in that first, the writings I did, I don't know whether I'd call it a poem. It was just my, thinking out and writing down. But I write about about our stories being that measurement of time. And, we tell us Gulaga is the mother mountain, and she has two sons, Najanuga and Baranguba. And the story goes that she was walking east collecting bush tucker, and her oldest son, Baranguba, he wanted to move away and set up his own camp. And she said, yep, just go out there, not too far away, just somewhere where I can still see you and keep an eye on you. And so we went out and he set up camp and out towards the east, and his younger brother had seen this, Najanuga. And I've got something else to tell you about that as well. So Najanuga wanted to set up his own camp too, and she said, no, you're too little. She said, you stay here right next to me. And Najanuga is a little baby, and he's leaning over and he's drinking out of the water hole. And in our language, Najang is fresh water. So we know, now that we're learning language, we know the connection our language has with country, because we know that story. We know the story of him leaning over, drinking the water. We didn't know that fresh water actually, but we do now, Najang. So we're making those connections now. We do know that Gulaga was an ancient volcano, and Najanuga and Baranguba are parasitic mountains off her. So she's given birth. So we talk about Gulaga Mountain having given birth to these two sons, when in natural fact, geological, millions of years ago, she did give birth to these two landscapes. And we talk about Baranguba being cut off, from his mother, and she can watch him from afar, but he's He's cut off. He's out there in the ocean. Well, he set up camp out there before the oceans rose, because we talk about in our stories going out to that island too, walking out there, how people were still telling those stories of our old people going out there, walking out there. And so we know that, it was probably over 30,000 years the oceans had rose up to, and the coast had changed. So the water had cut her oldest son off from her, but they still have that connection. So it's very interesting. So, but yeah, I know that Gulaga, when I continue to tell that story, because our grandfathers and great-grandfathers and great-great-grandmothers, and they through all of that chaos of colonisation, those stories were maintained. Not to their fullest, but enough for us to know. This is our place, this is where we belong. Yeah. Sorry.
It's very hard to follow, Cheryl.
Sorry.
Do you have a thought about a question, a landscape you keep returning to?
I guess I am fascinated by the landscape that I grew up in, which is the far west coast of South Australia. And I actually left there when I was 15. So it's less than a lot less. It's only a small portion of my life. And I, we were pretty isolated out on the farm, out of town, and I never felt a strong connection with community there. But when I drive west and the trees start getting shorter and the roads start getting straighter, there's definitely something that happens physically inside me that's which is fascinating. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that for now.
Yeah, the place that you keep coming back to, well, I just feel this valley, this earth here has given me so much. So this whole valley I will stay in or come back to. But if it's a little tiny spot, then in the midst of the flying foxes. And I did move to where I am now in order to protect them, because that was their camp and it was all being sold up as little housing blocks, and I thought, oh my God, people move in on the flying foxes and they decide they don't like them being there, and they do what is called relocation, which in fact should be called torture, because it's loud explosions and smoke and they drive them away. So that's why I live where I do, and it's a camp and it's called Batty Towers. And now that the trees in Panbula have grown up so much, the flying foxes have very wisely moved there and they've been welcomed. And it's wonderful because it's a much better mothering camp because it's got water. But the place I think of as really precious is coming back to the back veranda where I live when there were 100,000 camped there, and that was only a few years ago. 100,000 grey-headed flying foxes is a quarter of the surviving population of flying foxes, and they were all around, whenever they did their fly out, They were there, and I felt I knew every one of them. I still feel I know every one of them when I see them. I suppose when you get to know an animal really well, you sort of know all its relations, perhaps. I don't know. But people say, what is your favourite animal? I do not have a favourite animal. They're all favourites. But flying foxes and snakes get such a bad publicity and such bad attitudes that I do gravitate towards them to give them support. And I have fallen in love with flying foxes. I have to say, I have fallen in love with snakes too. Oh my God, very much. Because, you know, if we were not the dominant species, if snakes were the dominant species, they would be shocked at how dumb we are. But they would be far too sensitive to ever mention it. They're incredible. They know what's going on for at least 50 metres around them, if not 100 metres around them. They know what's going on. I mean, one snake that probably some people met, called Olivia, every time I took her out for a talk, I could almost rely on her to pick on who was the most vulnerable person there. The first time she did it, she went up to a man who was paralysed all down one side, and he was crying because he was standing, and she kept crawling up and trying to wrap over his arm. And he said, I've never met a snake before. And she was so gentle that he was just absolutely overwhelmed with the compliment she was paying him. And it happened so many times with so many vulnerable people that in the end I wasn't surprised. And then it happened with a man, and I thought, oh no, here we go. This is not my theory at all. This man is so healthy, and off he goes and walking off with his wife. And she set off after him instead of just waiting for me to take her back. And suddenly she was wanting to climb up and talk to him. And I said, oh, sorry about this. You're perfectly healthy and, you know, whatever. And he said, oh, no, I came out of hospital last week. I mean, I don't know if I'm answering the question at all. I think I got a little bit diverted. Oh, good. Okay.
What was the question again? You definitely did. Well, I grew up here. I'm sorry, I gave Boytown a bad rap before. I actually really love Eden and all that south of Eden. Kaya's like my favourite place in the whole world, so don't think that I don't like it. I love it. Yes, I grew up here and I left when I was 18. And I think that question, what place do I keep returning to, what place kept popping up in my writing and drawing, all my creative endeavours, was here. All little pockets of here. And when I wrote The Waterfowl Are Drunk, I think you can tell I was remembering here with a bit of idealism and nostalgia. It's kind of not a surface level look at here, but there's something very nostalgic about the way that I'm setting up place in that book. And then with Dear Ibis, I was in Wollongong when I wrote The Waterfowl Are Drunk, so you can tell, I think, that I was not here when I wrote that book. And then writing Dear Ibis, I was very much here. And here for me, it still holds a lot of grief and a lot of trauma, but also a lot of joy and a lot of, all those funny moments of growing up that I'd rather not mention. It still holds all of that for me. So coming back here, we came back because of illness in the family. And all of that kind of was triggered when I came back. I'd kind of run from all of that for a really long time, for 12 years. And so moving back was like, damn, I'm here now. And now I've had kids. My husband and I met in high school here. So I also have all of that. Awkward, young love. all those embarrassing moments that you run away from, they're very much here for me. And now I've got kids and I bought my grandmother's house. So I'm very much entrenched here now, and it holds so much good and so much that I've run from. And I mean, I can't keep like going back there forever with my writing, but maybe I can. Yes. There's a lot more to learn. But one thing I will say about writing about place or whatever, when I was in Sydney and Wollongong and writing about place there, I remember I wrote a poem that took place underneath the Coca-Cola sign at King's Cross. And it all, like all my stories, comes from something real. And I just felt so much freedom writing about that space, because every time I'd been there, I had been drunk. And I hardly remember it. And it was like this very public space that everybody knows of, and everyone's frequented it, everyone's driven past it. And I just felt this huge degree of freedom writing about it. I found it really easy to write about that space. Writing about here, I find to be very difficult, because there's all this weight on it, because like writing about Pambula, Nathan's helping me with my pronunciation. I still suck at it. Panbula, I think, is... Yeah, it's more of a bulla, I think he said. Anyway, don't quote me on that, God. He would just be here shaking his head at me. Writing about that, because I'm there every day, comes with a great deal of weight for me, because I care about it so much. But also, not that many people have written about it. Like, I haven't enjoyed that much art about Panbula. So there's like this great pressure, because like I've got friends in Sydney that have never been here, never been to Pambula. And so I might be giving them their first and only experience of here. So there is a great pressure on me to do a good job. And with place, you don't want to be stereotyping it either. You want it to feel familiar for those that know it, but you also want to give something fresh, something new about here, so people experience, something different, but also it feels familiar. I'm not communicating very well, but I take writing about here very seriously, and it's very stressful actually. And actually, talking about place tonight has been a lot harder than I came up with this idea, guys, and I was like, oh, it's a great idea. It's going to be so good to talk about that, and actually, I'm just finding like it's quite an emotional topic, because it's like really hard to talk about something you care about so much. But still, we must continue because it's important. Thanks everyone for putting up with my ramblings. Shut up, Kate. Carry on.
That's an excellent segue, Kate, because I was thinking... because somehow the time has actually gone really quickly. But I was thinking that a question, if I have to narrow it down to one more, and in some ways I think this has been answered, and I think you just named it, but like, why is it important? Why is it important that we create about place? I think, Cheryl, you've spoken to that in your own way already, and I think, the importance of stories. I think we all, whatever medium we work in, believe in the importance of stories. And I reckon because you're all here, you also believe in the importance of stories. But stories of place, whatever place means to us, whether we're speaking of the place that we've come from, the place that we find ourselves, the place that we've fallen in love with, or even, we haven't even had time to touch on it, but that idea of like an internal landscape. Or on the phone the other day, Cheryl, you were speaking about, I think we talked about people and how we've been talking a lot about geography and physical place, but there's a whole other realm of some internal landscape or relationships, and how actual people are a part of a sense of place. So there's so many directions that we haven't got to touch on, but I just wonder if we can just share any thoughts we have about why it matters. Either why it matters in a big picture way, that we keep writing songs and making art and telling stories and about place, or why it matters on a really personal level to you as an individual. To keep exploring place in your work. Can I put that one out there?
Okay. I've got so many thoughts about this. So, I grew up as fifth generation Australian on a property, and my parents didn't really talk about their childhoods, or they didn't really talk about like I knew there was the pile of stones where my great-grandparents' house was. I knew that, and I kind of had a vague idea that there was a house where our current house was, and I knew the ruins where my dad grew up, but like they didn't talk about where we came from before Australia, and in fact, now when they do, they can't even agree. And there's a lot to unravel there, and I feel like it's a journey of trying to come to know who I am, and it's as much about getting myself back and what we've lost. And Indigenous Australians have this incredible connection to homeland and place, and to an extent, there's a little hint of that, and like I see the way my dad looks at the landscape, and there's something pretty magic in that. But at some point, we left our homelands, and somehow they didn't keep talking about that place. Yeah. I've got a song called Farmer's Daughter, which I wrote, which to me was trying to touch on that. But when I actually look at the song, it's like maybe there's one line that alludes to it. It's like I'm kind of dodging around it, really. And maybe I'll play you this other song, so I actually wrote Farmer's Daughter twice, and the song I'm going to play for you now is kind of the same, me trying to wrangle at this same topic, but it's a completely different song, and I've written this song twice now as well. So, so this one, the first version of this song started when I was living with Pete Wilde, and he was into a cartoonist, XKCD. I don't think that's right, but anyway, a cartoonist, and he had this image of a signpost, and it said one town, 500 miles that way, one town 372 miles that way, space 62 miles. And around the same time, there was a thing going around Facebook that, I was scrolling one night, and I watched this little 15-minute Facebook documentary on astronauts. And it was so stunning. The astronauts were talking about how for years they were preparing to go to the moon, and it was all about the moon. And they got into outer space, and every spare second they spent what they called earth gazing. And the documentary had this incredible footage of this blue-green planet with clouds and like all these colours around the... I clearly have all the scientific words for this. And electrical storms from outer space. Just incredible. And I kind of it caught me by surprise, this feeling of like, oh my gosh, I belong there. You know, like, there's no denying it. That's my place. My whole respiratory system, everything, my stomach, everything is designed for here. And it was kind of cool to have a sense of belonging. So, yeah. I changed it to kilometres. It's called the Kármán line. We actually have a treaty for outer space, unlike for Australia. And the moon. Got a treaty for the moon. Yeah, maybe there'll be some more actually. Turn this around. So I think, unravelling this story is, and for this country to sort out sovereignty is very much for all of us, and it's finding that sense of belonging and knowing who we are, which, you know, I think that's pretty fundamental as part of the human experience, really, those things. Technology rambling. Sheet.
Do you need this one too?
I think I'll be okay, actually. This one. All right. Hang on a second. That's all right. We can make this work. Magpie tapping on my window pane, gold light kiss my cheek. Sky turned pink, my eyes drink deep, blue Bamboka Peak. Put the kettle on, I've just done another lap round the sun. And we're still spinning and I find myself standing on UN Nation. And every day is a revolution. Growing up, my mom never told many stories about back when she was young. And my dad never said much about the homelands where we came from. But 100K is all it takes straight up to the Kármán line. I hit the stratosphere and I start to get clear on where I belong. And every day is a revolution. I feel my toes in the wet kikuyu, hang my clothes on the hills hoist lines. I've been reading the stories of my great-grandfather, it's not such a different time. And there are words I find hard to say, let alone put in a song. I still close my eyes to genocide and colonization. But every day is a revolution. People been trekking to the big red rock at the heart of our nation. They're talking about getting a few things sorted with our constitution. And I don't want to hear you say it can't be done. You say people can't change, damn, I wish you met me when I was young. 'Cause every day is a revolution. Every day, another revolution.
So if anyone else has a burning response in them, either to that question about why does it matter to create a better place, or any last just thing that you really want to say, yeah, let's grab that one.
I'm going to take that moment. See, I always act like I'm shy, but I'm not really. What I forgot to mention in that story about Gulaga is that started my journey in doing the serious work that's in culture. I was invited away to New Zealand. I took the place of my two cousins, and I'm pretty sure I know why now. They conned me into going in their place because when you go there to New Zealand and you're going for, I was a cultural exchange, but I was going to be a part of the opening of the big exhibition at Wanganui Regional Gallery. Was the Maori students. It was their big exhibition, and if you're a guest, you have to sing. And I reckon that's why my cousins didn't go, because they were too ashamed to sing, so they pushed me along. And I was like, all the way, when I found out all the way to the gallery, my friend Marta was saying, Cheryl, you have to sing. I was saying, I can't sing, Marta. I'm not singing. That's it. I'm not doing it. She said, you have to. And so all the way there, I was like sweating. And like, I didn't know anything about language. That, this is a culture that have just been able to keep their culture so strong. Their language, their art, everything, their history. About them coming on the 20 canoes, from Tahiti well, I don't really know, but, that's kind of... I think that's the kind of the gist of it, anyways. So I was really intimidated. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know any of my language. The only song I knew was Inanei. So, I was forced to sing on the night after they'd sung, and I got up and sang Inanei Kapuana. That was the only song I knew. And everyone clapped me, but I know, they did. They probably thought I was a terrible singer. But the whole time I was over there, I was actually really homesick. But they took me around, and it was my first time out of Australia, and I actually really felt it. Like I'd never left Australia, I'd never left my family, I'd never left this place. And we were there, and I was homesick, and I wanted to come home, and I went and spent a couple of nights. I was billeted out with friends Marta and Alwyn, but they said, why don't you go and stay with this other lady, I can't remember her name now, but she was a master printer, and you might be able to do some work with her. So I went over there and to her place, and she said, if you're homesick, you just do some artwork, concentrate on something else. And I picked up a tile, because it's just the lino tiles of the floor that she was cutting out. And it's just, okay. So I started thinking about what I was wanting to do, because before that I was just really painting random things that weren't really of any importance, and then being there and seeing those people tell their stories. I knew all my own stories from home, but I wasn't painting them. And that changed things. Because the first thing I did was when she said, well, what is it that you want to do? I remember, what is it? It's my country calling me back. and it's the mountain calling me back, and that mountain's Gulliga. And that's what our old people always say, the mountain, she'll always bring you back, always call you back. So that was my very first artwork that included, and that was really important for me. And that just set a whole, changed my whole direction in what I was doing in my life. And that artwork, I didn't finish it until about 2 years after I'd come back to Australia. And we sent I started doing a show. My very first exhibition was here in Bega at Spiral, my very first solo. And that was the lino I had. I went to Canberra and I met up with a fellow named Theo Tremblay. He's done printing for lots of other Indigenous artists all over Australia. I remember him at uni. He actually done a lecture in one of my classes once, and I remember him from that. Anyways, that guy, he said to me, I said, well, how much should I charge for these things? I had no idea. He said, oh, you probably get about $200 for that. And I said, what, $200 for the whole lot? Because I was thinking I was going to come back here and sell them in the show for $10 each. He said, no, $200 per print, and I nearly fainted, and I thought, oh, God, really? But anyways, long story short, that very first print is actually that whole body of work that I did with the printmaking. That's now in the New South Wales Art Gallery. Yeah, so that set a thing for that started. It started up something really, but it's that goes back to that mountain calls me back. Sorry, it took the long way.
Alexandra, do you have anything else you want to add to the conversation before we...
Well, there was only one. There was one thing that I did think of, because Ray originally said to us, one of the questions would be, how do you get involved in the creative zone or whatever? And I thought, oh my God, it just bursts out and there's nothing you can do. and I thought of one absolute classic example, like I always used to think that it was a treat to be in a waiting room at a doctor's or somewhere like that, because you would get to read Women's Day and Women's Weekly, and it was so exciting because it was another world that I knew nothing about, and I would never go and buy one. But in the dentist or so, where, oh my God, this is so wonderful, and they're telling you, my God, you can be the richest person in the world, the happiest person in the world, if you have this washing machine or this hairbrush or whatever it is. It'll be something to do with beauty or something to do with machines. Diet, all those things. And but there was something else that this hit me only when I was thinking about a song that's been in my head since I was about 9. And it's always been my favourite song in the world. And I have no idea why, because I knew nothing of drought. I knew nothing of how magic rain is, but it's, I don't know if anybody would even know it, and I'm not going to sing it. But it's Le jour où la pluie viendra, nous serons, toi et moi, les plus riches du monde. On the day when the rain comes, you and I will be the richest people in the world. And I thought, oh my God. And it just went with the women's weeklies and stuff. And I thought, so then I did write a poem, but I won't read it, I don't think. But the two things just went bang together. And that often happens. It's just something you've been with, and then something else comes in from the side, and you think, oh my God. And it bursts out, and you have to write or sing or whatever it is.
Okay, can you take the mic and close us out?
With a reading.
Or whatever else you want to do.
I'm just going to do a reading because I think I've rambled enough. I'm going to read, as suggested by Ray, which I think was probably a great suggestion for this context. I'm going to read the very last piece in the book, which I intended to be like a secret song, like from a 90s CD, that, the CD's finished and then you're doing the washing or whatever and it just scares the hell out of you. Like, what? It just starts playing this weird little song. This is my weird little secret song of the book. And I literally wrote it at 3 a.m. in the morning. I'd just been in Wollongong for the Writers' Festival, which I had helped start back in its genesis. And I kind of helped run it for the first 2 years. And then I moved down here. And then to go back, and I went with Gabby Stroud. And I think Gabby might be here tonight. Oh, yeah. Oh, hi, Gabby. I couldn't see you down there. Oh, those guys. We had our first big nights out in Wollongong. I know it's time. I know, yeah. Anyway, I went to the Wollongong Writers' Festival with Gabby and Gary, and we had such a good time. It was just amazing to see where it had got to. And we were having breakfast, and Clem Ford just wanders over to say hi to Gabby. And then Jess Hill, the author of See What You Made Me Do, came and had lunch with us. No big deal. And I got home and I'd been in the trenches raising a baby, and it was just such a nice bit of respite for me. It was so nice to go back to Wollongong, and it was so nice to come home. And I went to bed, and I'd already submitted this book to the publisher. And I woke up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and this weird piece of writing came out of me. I think it might be a poem or a spoken word. I'm not really sure. I'm going to share it with you, and my editor and I discussed it, and we put it in exactly, pretty much exactly as it came out. To sleep is to float, is to forgive. Dying is so much like going to sleep. I must start with water. I am water. I've died in water 23 times, in 23 different dreams. I've almost died in water for real, 3 different times. I've almost died just from the darkness, many, many times. I've died before, and that is why I'm an insomniac. I have died in my dreams too many times to count. But I've died in a car once, for real. When I died, it was like involuntary sleep. I thought of every visual and memorable moment of my life to date. Frantically flicked through my memories like a rack of clothing in an op shop, and every night that frantic shuffling of coat hangers laden with food and tears and dances stops me falling into slumber. It wakes me up and up and up and up until I am iridescent on the roof, stuck to my own tongue, trembling in my ears, petrified like a rock. I am a light. I cannot sleep then. I am not ready to die. This is what I said when I died. This is what I pleaded with my maker, and I was coercive. And now I won't sleep and I won't die, and if my heart rate increases enough with this Graves' disease, perhaps I'll transcend my own fruity body and become a hummingbird, flapping and flicking like a blinking eye. Quick, light. Moving so fast I stay in the same spot, grounded but lidless. Without lids, the lenses dry out and the water drinks all of my shame, and it's impossible to sleep. The water drinks me down in gulps too loud, and I eat all of the sleeps I never had, as if they were a protein that could rebuild me, as if they were fillers for the voids left by all that dying. You can't fill those voids. You can try to drown them, but they burst to the top every time, obsessed with floating. Why are the death bullets in me unsinkable? And even if I am dead, even if one day I get to sleep, these floats will pick me up on the way and take me with them. Every single time. Those air bubbles drag me screaming through the currents and tides towards the sky. I pop out like a bottle, a messageless bottle, but unsinkable all the same. There I am, floating on the sea lip as if it's the only valuable thing. Water, my life source, my body, my home. And one day when I'm ready to stop flying, I'll land there with the ibises and the egrets, touching my own cotton plume and knowing I am water. And when I die, it is nothing but a small sleep and a float upwards until I am water, in water, of water. Even if I am lidless, by that stage, I'll just want to go home. When I was a teenager and my body changed and had headlights all over it, and my chest grew into something else, I felt dirty. I was lit up even in the shadows, and the only thing that washed off that shame and slime was salt water. It was the only thing that could clean me up. Shame that rife has an acidic sting to it that really rips apart a teenager's skin. The salt water with its magic alkalinity could take that sting away. It made my body weightless. It covered my indecent curves. It was only on land that I didn't recognize myself. Only later did I realize my curves were real curves, like a nautilus shell, like the waves, like a wing. I would never call these curves anything like that again. With their buoyancy, they brought me to the surface, even when I was well and truly drowning. They fed hunger. They protected me from my obsession with conformity and showed me the beauty of the fringes. This body is of this land, and this land is extraordinary. Let's stop stuffing them up. I am no longer waiting for your approval. I will rebel with water and tenderness. That is how we save a life. And I've got used to going to sleep now. I found my lids. And at least when I do eventually die again, I will die as myself. I will end back where I started, of water, of land, of feathers, floating and flying through time, and silvery threads and space junk and sand and hot air balloons and flocks of birds I do belong with, and sticky lino and whistling kettles, past hatching swan eggs and trees planted by loved ones well before my time, and through pubs and schools and memories and houses and wetlands and blood. And I will hear nothing but the flame robin as it flies freely beside me. You see, I've made peace with my earthquakes, and I've made peace with my hand in all these fires. And I know now how to change my ways. I know how it felt to stand in those rains that came after the flames. I waited until that shame washed off completely, and I let myself soak all the way through to the bone until I was indeed water again. I know when this house falls down, the earth will always catch me. And even if you don't know it, I know it will catch you too. You are already forgiven. You will find all of your stories there waiting for you. I would also just like to thank you all for coming and to thank Ray for being such a beautiful presence on the email line. Email line? I don't know what it's called, but also for hosting tonight. So beautiful. And thank you to my idols that are just sitting here with me.
Thanks, Kate. And thanks, all of you. I think we've probably, in love and respect for our library staff, exhausted an opportunity for questions. But there are books for sale and some of Cheryl's art. And if you have questions, we are in the space. Please come and grab us. But thank you for being with us. And thank you to the library and gallery for holding this space for us.